Good evening, everyone. Joining us from the UK, from Bosnia and India, and good afternoon to those joining us from the United States and elsewhere in the world. You're all very welcome, and we're delighted to have you with us tonight for this book launch and memorial for the Srebrenica genocide. A special welcome also to our presenters this evening, who I will have the pleasure of introducing individually to each of you as the programme evolves. I'd like to begin tonight with a brief background information for you before passing over to our guest speakers. Bosnia and Herzegovina, typically referred to as Bosnia, is a small and beautiful country which was part of the multi-ethnic former Yugoslavia. In 1991, following the dissolution of Yugoslavia, the Bosnian Serb Army, BSA, with the support of the Milošević regime in Belgrade, Serbia, launched a brutal 3.5-year war of aggression against the sovereign country of Bosnia. They embarked on a campaign of terror and mass murder, intended to ethnically cleanse the non-Serb populations of the country. The BSA laid siege to the Bosnian capital of Sarajevo for 3.5 years, ultimately killing over 11,000 inhabitants, including more than 1,600 children. By the end of the war, more than 100,000 people were killed in Bosnia, the majority of them civilians. In Eastern Bosnia, the violence was especially intense, where tens of thousands of Muslim civilians were forced to flee their homes and to seek protection in the small town of Srebrenica. From 1992 on, Srebrenica was under constant attack from the BSA, without access to food, proper housing, or basic medical supplies. The humanitarian crisis continued to worsen. In April of 1993, Srebrenica was formally declared an official safe area under the protection of the United Nations. International troops were stationed at the UN base in the nearby village of Potocari, and a temporary ceasefire was mediated with the BSA, a ceasefire that lasted for less than a year. The violence continued to escalate, and Srebrenica fell to the Bosnian Serb forces under the command of Ratko Mladić on July 11, 1995. Before a throng of international journalists, he made no secret of his intention to violently reclaim the territory for the nationalist project of Greater Serbia. That night, around 12,000 Muslim men and boys fled through the forests in an attempt to reach free territory. Well over 2/3 who started on this journey, which would come to be known as the Death March, were eventually captured and killed by the BSA. Meanwhile, more than 26,000 refugees took shelter in and around the UN base, believing they would be protected. However, the BSA quickly assumed control of the compound, facing no resistance from the UN Dutch battalion stationed there. In addition to shortages of food and water, the Muslim civilians faced unspeakable abuse at the hands of the occupying soldiers. Shortly thereafter, the BSA began to separate men and boys from their families. Thousands of women, children, and elderly were loaded onto buses and forcibly deported. Over the next several days, the more than 8,000 men and boys who had been captured in the Death March were transported to numerous mass execution sites and slaughtered. Their bodies were dumped in an elaborate network of mass graves in a sophisticated operation designed to conceal the criminal evidence. Formally ruled a genocide by multiple international courts, the crimes committed in Srebrenica in July 1995 constitute the most horrific massacre to take place on European soil since World War II. Despite overwhelming forensic evidence and the unanimous rulings of the courts, denial of the Srebrenica genocide persists to this day, more than 25 years after the violence.